The Battle of Guam, fought between July 21 and August 10, 1944, was a crucial part of the Mariana Islands campaigning during World War II. This battle was significant because Guam, an American territory, had been captured by Japan in December 1941 following the attack on Pearl Harbor. For nearly 3 years, Japan had fortified the island, turning it into a stronghold with thousands of troops, extensive bunkers, and defensive positions. The United States, determined to reclaim Guam, launched a powerful invasion to break Japanese control and use the island as a key base for further attacks on Japan. Guam's importance lay in its strategic location. For Japan, it was a defensive barrier protecting the home islands from advancing American forces. For the U.S., seizing Guam would provide a critical air base, allowing bombers to launch direct attacks on Japan and helping secure American dominance in the Pacific. The battle was destined to be brutal, as Japan had stationed nearly 23,000 troops and heavily fortified the island with machine gun nests, hidden bunkers, and artillery. Additionally, the Japanese had more than 1,000 aircraft in the region, ready to defend the island against an American invasion. The U.S. invasion strategy was meticulously planned. It involved intense naval bombardments, aerial attacks, and the massive amphibious assault. Despite the overwhelming firepower of the American forces, the Japanese defenders put up fierce resistance, engaging in relentless combat, banzai charges, and deadly ambushes in the jungle terrain. The battle was marked by heavy losses, with over 23,000 Japanese soldiers killed and 1,000 aircraft destroyed. The sheer scale of the losses suffered by Japan raises a compelling question. How did the United States manage to overcome such an entrenched and well-defended enemy? The answer lies in superior tactics, overwhelming firepower, and relentless determination. This battle was more than just a military engagement. It was a turning point in the Pacific War that set the stage for the final defeat of Japan. Guam, a small yet strategically vital island in the Pacific, was originally under American control before being seized by Japanese forces in December 1941. Shortly after the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor. This loss was a major setback for the United States, as Guam's capture provided Japan with a crucial foothold in the Pacific, allowing them to strengthen their defensive perimeter and disrupt American supply lines. The island's geographical position made it an essential asset for both sides, and the Japanese wasted no time in transforming it into a heavily fortified stronghold. They spent more than 2 years reinforcing their defenses, fully aware that the Americans would eventually attempt to reclaim the island. For the United States, regaining control of Guam was not just a matter of reclaiming lost territory. It was a strategic necessity. The island's location was perfect for establishing an advanced airbase capable of launching long-range bombing missions against the Japanese mainland. By securing Guam, the U.S. could bring their powerful B-29 superfortresses within striking distance of Japan, allowing them to inflict devastating damage on enemy infrastructure, military facilities, and industrial centers. Beyond its role as an airbase, Guam was also a key naval stronghold. It provided the U.S. Navy with a crucial anchorage for warships and submarines operating in the Pacific, further tightening the noose around Japan's defensive network. Additionally, Guam's role in the broader island-hopping campaign was critical. This strategy involved bypassing heavily fortified Japanese strongholds and instead capturing strategically significant islands that could serve as stepping stones toward the final invasion of Japan. Guam's capture would bring American forces one step closer to achieving that ultimate objective. To prepare for an American counteroffensive, Japan stationed approximately 18,000 soldiers on the island. As the threat of invasion grew, reinforcements arrived, bringing the total Japanese defensive force to nearly 41,000 troops. These soldiers were not only well-trained but also heavily fortified, making use of Guam's rugged and jungle-covered terrain to create formidable defensive positions. The Japanese constructed an elaborate network of bunkers, trenches, caves, and tunnels, designed to withstand heavy bombardment and provide strong defensive cover. Machine gun nests and artillery positions were carefully placed to create deadly crossfire zones, ensuring that any advancing American troops would face a brutal and costly battle. Additionally, The Japanese had over 1,000 aircraft stationed at nearby airfields, ready to intercept incoming U.S. bombers and support ground operations if an invasion occurred. Confident in their defenses, the Japanese command believed that Guam could withstand any American assault. However, they underestimated the sheer scale of U.S. firepower and the relentless efficiency of American military strategy. The United States had learned valuable lessons from previous battles in the Pacific, particularly in places like Tarawa and Saipan, where Japanese defenders had fought to the last man. Armed with this experience, the U.S. planned a massive amphibious invasion, combining overwhelming naval and air bombardments with well-coordinated ground attacks. As the American fleet moved into position and warplanes roared overhead, the stage was set for one of the most intense battles of the Pacific War. The U.S. invasion of Guam was meticulously planned and executed with overwhelming force to ensure victory against the deeply entrenched Japanese defenders. Recognizing the immense challenge posed by the fortified enemy positions, the American military initiated an intense pre-invasion bombardment designed to cripple Japan's defensive capabilities before the ground assault even began. Over 36,000 shells were fired at enemy fortifications, relentlessly pounding Japanese bunkers, artillery positions, supply depots, and communication lines. The sheer scale of this attack was unprecedented, as it was carried out by a powerful fleet of 600 warships. This armada included formidable battleships capable of leveling enemy strongholds with their massive guns, aircraft carriers launching waves of bombers, cruisers providing heavy artillery support, and destroyers clearing out smaller enemy positions. Every effort was made to weaken the Japanese defenses and throw their forces into disarray before American troops set foot on the island. To complement the naval bombardment, American B-24 bombers and naval aircraft conducted relentless air raids, targeting Japanese airfields, supply lines, and command centers. These strategic strikes were essential in neutralizing Japan's air power before the invasion. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft were destroyed on the ground before they could take off, eliminating the threat of enemy bombers and fighters harassing the incoming U.S. forces. This ensured that American troops could land without fear of aerial attacks, giving them a crucial advantage. The combined air and sea bombardments turned large sections of the island into a wasteland of smoldering ruins, but the Japanese defenders, well entrenched in their underground bunkers and fortified positions, remained a formidable obstacle. On July 21, 1944, the full-scale amphibious invasion of Guam began. More than 55,000 American troops, primarily from the battle-hardened 3rd Marine Division and the experienced 77th Infantry Division, stormed the beaches in a coordinated assault. As landing craft approached the shore, they were met with a torrent of Japanese fire. Machine gun nests rained down bullets, artillery batteries unleashed deadly barrages, and snipers hidden in fortified positions took aim at exposed soldiers. The beaches quickly became a chaotic battleground, littered with debris, wounded soldiers, and destroyed landing craft. Yet, despite the ferocity of the Japanese resistance, the American troops pushed forward with relentless determination. To break through the heavily fortified defenses, U.S. forces deployed tanks, flamethrowers, and explosive charges to clear out bunkers and pillboxes. As Marines and infantry units advanced inland, the battle turned into brutal, close-quarters combat. The dense jungle terrain of Guam provided ample cover for ambushes, and the Japanese defenders fought with unwavering tenacity, launching counterattacks and using hidden tunnels to strike at American forces from unexpected angles. The U.S. troops, however, adapted quickly, using superior firepower, coordinated assaults, and relentless pressure to overcome the defenders. Every inch of ground was fought over with immense ferocity, as the Americans sought to reclaim the island and eliminate the Japanese presence once and for all. As U.S. forces pushed deeper into the island, the battle escalated into an unforgiving fight through Guam's rugged and dense jungle terrain. The Japanese defenders, well trained for guerrilla-style warfare, had spent years preparing the island for a prolonged resistance. They made use of every natural advantage, setting up snipers in trees and concealed positions, constructing well-camouflaged bunkers, and placing deadly booby traps along expected routes of advance. The thick foliage limited visibility, forcing American troops to rely on caution and teamwork as they navigated through the perilous terrain. Every step forward came with the risk of sudden ambushes, and even seemingly quiet areas often turned into deadly kill zones where Japanese forces struck with precision before vanishing into the jungle or retreating into well-hidden cave networks. These underground fortifications allowed Japanese troops to regroup, set up new ambushes, and prolong the fight, making it exceptionally difficult for American forces to completely root them out without the use of heavy firepower. Recognizing that a war of attrition would favor the Americans, Japanese commanders resorted to desperate and ferocious tactics in an attempt to halt the U.S. advance. One of the most terrifying strategies was the use of banzai charges, massive suicidal assaults where hundreds of Japanese soldiers rushed toward American positions wielding bayonets, swords, and grenades. These frantic attacks were meant to overwhelm and break the morale of the enemy through sheer shock and aggression. However, against the firepower of American machine guns, rifles, and artillery, these charges turned into bloodbaths. Entire waves of Japanese troops were cut down before they could even reach U.S. lines. The battlefield became littered with fallen soldiers, a grim testament to the determination of the Japanese forces and the overwhelming superiority of American firepower. Despite their bravery, the Japanese were unable to make any significant breakthroughs, and these suicidal assaults only hastened their destruction. American tactical superiority proved decisive in securing victory. The U.S. military adapted to the difficult terrain and defensive strategies of the Japanese, employing flamethrowers and explosive charges to flush enemy troops out of their caves and tunnels. Entire underground networks that had served as defensive strongholds were systematically destroyed, leaving the Japanese with fewer places to regroup or hide. Artillery and air support provided constant bombardment, demolishing entrenched positions and cutting off enemy supply lines. Every attempt by Japanese forces to regroup and launch counterattacks was met with overwhelming force, crushing their ability to sustain the fight. In addition to firepower, the Americans also had a significant numerical advantage, with tens of thousands of well-supplied troops steadily pushing forward. The combination of superior numbers, relentless pressure, and devastating weaponry ensured that every Japanese effort to hold ground was met with an insurmountable response. As the battle wore on, it became increasingly clear that Guam's fate was sealed. It was only a matter of time before the island was fully under U.S. control, marking yet another crucial step in America's campaign to reclaim the Pacific and bring the war closer to Japan's doorstep. As U.S. forces pushed deeper into the island, the battle escalated into an unforgiving fight through Guam's rugged and dense jungle terrain. The Japanese defenders, well-trained for guerrilla-style warfare, had spent years preparing the island for a prolonged resistance. They made use of every natural advantage, setting up snipers in trees and concealed positions, constructing well-camouflaged bunkers, and placing deadly booby traps along expected routes of advance. The thick foliage limited visibility, forcing American troops to rely on caution and teamwork as they navigated through the perilous terrain. Every step forward came with the risk of sudden ambushes, and even seemingly quiet areas often turned into deadly kill zones where Japanese forces struck with precision before vanishing into the jungle or retreating into well-hidden cave networks. These underground fortifications allowed Japanese troops to regroup, set up new ambushes, and prolong the fight, making it exceptionally difficult for American forces to completely root them out without the use of heavy firepower. Recognizing that a war of attrition would favor the Americans, Japanese commanders resorted to desperate and ferocious tactics in an attempt to halt the U.S. advance. One of the most terrifying strategies was the use of banzai charges, massive suicidal assaults where hundreds of Japanese soldiers rushed toward American positions wielding bayonets, swords, and grenades. These frantic attacks were meant to overwhelm and break the morale of the enemy through sheer shock and aggression. However, against the firepower of American machine guns, rifles, and artillery, these charges turned into bloodbaths. Entire waves of Japanese troops were cut down before they could even reach U.S. lines. The battlefield became littered with fallen soldiers, a grim testament to the determination of the Japanese forces and the overwhelming superiority of American firepower. Despite their bravery, The Japanese were unable to make any significant breakthroughs, and these suicidal assaults only hastened their destruction. American tactical superiority proved decisive in securing victory. The U.S. military adapted to the difficult terrain and defensive strategies of the Japanese, employing flamethrowers and explosive charges to flush enemy troops out of their caves and tunnels. Entire underground networks that had served as defensive strongholds were systematically destroyed, leaving the Japanese with fewer places to regroup or hide. Artillery and air support provided constant bombardment, demolishing entrenched positions and cutting off enemy supply lines. Every attempt by Japanese forces to regroup and launch counterattacks was met with overwhelming force, crushing their ability to sustain the fight. In addition to firepower, the Americans also had a significant numerical advantage, with tens of thousands of well-supplied troops steadily pushing forward. The combination of superior numbers, relentless pressure, and devastating weaponry ensured that every Japanese effort to hold ground was met with an insurmountable response. As the battle wore on, it became increasingly clear that Guam's fate was sealed. It was only a matter of time before the island was fully under U.S. control, marking yet another crucial step in America's campaign to reclaim the Pacific and bring the war closer to Japan's doorstep. After suffering devastating losses and losing control of crucial strongholds, the remaining Japanese forces withdrew to the rugged northern mountains of Guam, where they prepared for a final, desperate stand. The terrain itself offered a significant defensive advantage, with steep cliffs, dense jungle, and an intricate network of caves providing natural fortifications. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the Japanese soldiers were determined to fight to the last man, adhering to their strict military code of honor. They transformed the mountains into a deadly battlefield, constructing hidden bunkers, laying traps, and fortifying their positions within thousands of caves. Their strategy was not to win, but to inflict as many American casualties as possible before their inevitable defeat. As U.S. forces advanced into the mountainous terrain, the battle grew even more ferocious. The thick jungle severely limited visibility, making every step forward a dangerous gamble. American soldiers often found themselves walking into sudden ambushes as Japanese troops emerged from concealed tunnels or hidden positions to launch surprise attacks. The terrain made traditional combat strategies difficult, forcing American troops into grueling close-quarters engagements. In many instances, fighting took place at arm's length, with soldiers using bayonets, knives, and even their bare hands in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The Japanese defenders, knowing they had no reinforcements or escape, fought with unparalleled ferocity, determined to take as many enemies with them as possible. Clearing the caves and bunkers was among the most dangerous and exhausting tasks for U.S. troops. Each hideout had to be individually approached and neutralized, often at great risk to the soldiers involved. Many caves were filled with hidden defenders who refused to surrender, forcing American troops to use flamethrowers, grenades, and explosives to clear them out. The intense heat of the Pacific, combined with the relentless combat and the psychological toll of battling an enemy that refused to give up, pushed American soldiers to their limits. Yet, despite the immense challenges, they continued their relentless assault, determined to bring the battle to an end. Amidst the chaos, a major turning point came when Japanese Commander General Takeshi Takashina was killed in action. His death struck a devastating blow to the already crumbling Japanese defense. Without a strong leader to coordinate their efforts, the remaining defenders were thrown into disarray. Communication broke down, and without clear orders, many soldiers made their own grim decisions. Some launched reckless final attacks, charging at U.S. troops in futile attempts to break their lines. Others, deeply ingrained with the warrior code of Bushido, chose to die rather than surrender. Mass suicides became tragically common, with entire groups of Japanese soldiers detonating grenades inside caves or leaping off cliffs to their deaths, unwilling to face capture. These final moments of resistance were both horrific and heartbreaking, marking the end of one of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific. With the last remnants of Japanese opposition eliminated, Guam was finally secured under American control. The victory was a critical step in the U.S. campaign to push toward Japan, providing a vital air and naval base for future operations. However, the cost of the battle was immense, with thousands of lives lost on both sides. For the surviving American troops, the brutal fighting on Guam was a sobering reminder of the challenges still ahead as they moved closer to the Japanese homeland. The Battle of Guam ended in a catastrophic defeat for the Japanese forces, marking a significant turning point in the Pacific War. Out of the 29,000 Japanese troops stationed on the island, more than 23,000 were killed in action, a staggering loss that virtually annihilated Japan's defensive force. The few survivors who managed to escape retreated into the island's dense jungles, where some remained in hiding for years, unwilling to accept defeat. Many of these soldiers, cut off from communication with their command, continued to resist sporadically, convinced that the war was still ongoing. Their commitment to the Bushido Code, which emphasized honor in battle and discouraged surrender, led some to live in isolation for decades before finally emerging long after the war had ended. While the American victory was decisive, it did not come without cost. The fierce resistance put up by the Japanese defenders resulted in approximately 7,000 U.S. casualties, including both killed and wounded. The Americans faced relentless banzai charges, well-hidden sniper nests, and heavily fortified caves that required intense and grueling combat to clear. However, with superior firepower, well-coordinated assaults, and a relentless offensive strategy, U.S. forces were able to systematically dismantle the Japanese defensive positions. By August 10, 1944, Guam was completely secured, marking another significant step in the U.S. island-hopping campaign. With Guam back under American control, the island was rapidly transformed into a crucial military base that would play a pivotal role in the final stages of the war. Massive airfields were constructed, allowing long-range bombers, including the formidable B-29 Superfortress, to launch direct attacks on the Japanese homeland. These bombers carry out devastating raids on Tokyo and other major cities, crippling Japan's industrial capacity and pushing the enemy closer to total defeat. Guam also became a major logistical hub, providing a secure location for refueling, resupplying, and planning further operations against Japan. Beyond its immediate tactical significance, the fall of Guam had a far-reaching impact on the Pacific theater. The loss of the island shattered Japan's defensive perimeter, making it nearly impossible for them to hold their remaining territories. The capture of Guam, along with other islands in the Marianas, meant that Japan could no longer maintain a solid defensive line, forcing them into a desperate and unsustainable struggle to protect their shrinking empire. With U.S. forces advancing relentlessly, the Japanese military was left with few options, setting the stage for the final, desperate battles of the war. The Battle of Guam was a pivotal moment in the Pacific War, demonstrating the overwhelming strength of the U.S. military and the catastrophic losses suffered by the Japanese forces. The American assault was relentless, utilizing superior firepower, strategic planning, and relentless air and naval bombardments to weaken enemy positions. More than 1,000 Japanese aircraft were destroyed, crippling Japan's ability to mount an effective air defense and leaving their ground forces vulnerable to continuous attacks. The sheer scale of the American offensive left the Japanese defenders with little hope of reinforcement or escape. With over 23,000 Japanese soldiers killed, their defensive force was nearly obliterated, marking one of the most one-sided battles of the Pacific campaign. Despite their fierce resistance and desperate counterattacks, the defenders could not withstand the superior numbers and firepower of the U.S. military. The American victory at Guam had profound strategic consequences that reshaped the war in the Pacific. With the island secured, the U.S. established a major base that became instrumental in launching air raids against the Japanese mainland. The B-29 Superfortress bombers, which had the range to strike deep into enemy territory, now had a forward operating base from which to launch devastating attacks on Japan's cities and industrial centers. The ability to conduct sustained bombing campaigns from Guam put Japan under constant pressure, severely weakening its war effort and disrupting its supply lines. This battle was not just about reclaiming territory. It was about setting the stage for the final phase of the war, bringing the conflict directly to Japan's doorstep. Beyond its immediate tactical importance, the fall of Guam signaled the collapse of Japan's once formidable defensive perimeter. For years, Japan had relied on a network of heavily fortified islands to slow down the American advance. But the loss of Guam proved that this strategy was no longer effective. The island-hopping campaign had systematically dismantled Japan's outer defenses, and with each victory, the United States moved closer to the Japanese mainland. The fall of Guam reinforced the reality that Japan was no longer in a position to hold its territories, and its military was increasingly on the defensive, forced into desperate last stands with dwindling resources and manpower. The significance of the Battle of Guam extended beyond military strategy. It was a powerful symbol of American resilience and determination. The brutal fighting, the high cost of lives, and the ultimate victory demonstrated the unwavering commitment of U.S. forces to see the war through to its conclusion. This battle accelerated Japan's inevitable defeat, pushing them closer to surrender as the American war machine continued its relentless advance. With Guam in U.S. hands, the final phase of the Pacific War had begun, and the path to victory was now clearer than